Our expert, Dr. Stephen Hassan, is a renowned cult expert in the United States and has some fascinating insights to share with us. Dr. Hassan, a former member of the Moonies, has been studying cults for over 50 years and is now a leading expert in the field. He's here to discuss how Trump uses mind control. So, let's dive into this intriguing topic and learn more about the cult of Trump.
The most we've ever had was 38. So you're good. So you're free to talk. Explain the cult of Trump. Explain how you got into this. You take it, talk about whatever you'd like to talk about.
Okay, great. So, thank you for inviting me, and I like to begin my I should say my primary website is freedomofmind.com, but I also have a research nonprofit site called freedomfromundoinfluence.org, where I did my doctoral research, wrote some journal article research, and we're going to be doing more research on the bite model with an anonymous 40-question way for people to assess authoritarianism. I always like to start presentations with a question, because for me, what's precious about having freedom of mind is being able to ask questions and not being afraid to think from different perspectives and such. And so I would like people to take a moment and think, how would you know if you were brainwashed or if you were under mind control? And for brevity of time, I won't do interaction right now. I'll just go through the presentation and we can circle back to this. But what I want to say is that I got interested in this topic because I got deceptively recruited into a front group of the Moonies cult while I was 19 years old at Queens College in 1974. My girlfriend had dumped me. I was kind of down. I was in the cafeteria at Queens College in New York City. 3 women flirted with me and lied to me and said they were students. And I asked them, are you part of some religious group? No, not at all. But within a matter of weeks, I was believing this guy was the greatest man in human history, Sun Myung Moon. He was 10 times greater than Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad, and he was going to save the world. Here in these images, he's being coronated king in the Senate, the Dirksen Senate Office Building in Washington, D.C. And Moon was best known for his mass marriages, where he would line up members who often didn't even know each other or speak the same language even. But because he claimed to have powers to know everything about you and your spirituality, he would assign people to each other. And I think his record was 30,000 couples at one shot, and people had 5 minutes to decide if they would agree with God's choice for them. I really was so indoctrinated. I dropped out of college. I quit my job. I turned my back on my family, my friends. I was asked to throw out my original poetry, which I did because I believed so thoroughly. And I got deprogrammed after a near-fatal van crash after 2.5 years. I was in the hospital away from the group, sleeping. I should say I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, 7 days a week for the 2.5 years. So it was the first time my brain got to rest. And it was in that context that I called my sister, which led to an invitation to visit, which led to a deprogramming effort, which led to me agreeing to meet with the ex-members just to prove that I wasn't brainwashed or mind control. I was that much of a true believer. Moon's dead. Oh, and I should just wanted to comment. The Washington Times is the Moonies' right-wing entity. and I did an interview with David Lipsky this year on climate science denial, and David talked about the Moonies front group, the Washington Times, being the single biggest purveyor of climate science denial on planet Earth. So very relevant to the disaster of global warming. The cult, I have an error in this slide. I apologize. Okay, just fixed it. So Moon died. His wife took over the main group. She had a war with her two sons, Sean and Justin Moon, who live in Pennsylvania. And Sean is the king. He has a crown of AR-15 bullets, and his brother Justin has a gun factory making AR-15s. This is another thing, and I have to fix this slide too. I thought I had fixed these slides. Forgive me. I grabbed the wrong deck. Anyway, so Michael Flynn has been doing the Rod of Iron freedom festivals around the country, sponsored by Sean Moon, and the Rod of Iron is a misquote or a claim in Revelations. The Rod of Iron is really an AR-15, so he says. And this creep has two training compounds, one in Tennessee, one in Waco, Texas, right now, using vets to train people with assault rifles. And yes, they were at January 6th saying it was Antifa, and Washington Times was saying it was Antifa. And a group of folks called Capitol Hunters found video of the Moonies in mass. And so that's my entry point. I wanted to understand what happened to my mind, what is brainwashing, what is mind control, and you're basically meeting me 48 years later, studying this stuff full time, helping people get out of cults, being a mental health professional, authoring 4 books. The last is called The Cult of Trump, which is what we're talking about. And just a note, because as you know, Big Tobacco hired experts to say that smoking doesn't cause cancer. We know fossil fuel companies hired experts to say there's no proof that there's global warming. Cults have hired experts to say there's no such thing as brainwashing or mind control, and we should call all religions new religious movements and not cults. But I want to share the American Psychiatric Association's manual that literally talks about disruption of identity due to brainwashing and mind control. And this has been in DSM-5 and 4 and 3. And then I want to just say that destructive cults are not homogeneous. Most people in cults are very fringe members. They have no clue what's going on really at the top. But they'll give money, they'll go to events, they'll proselytize, but they really are not part of the rank and file or the core devotees or the leadership. And in authoritarian cults, information is on a need-to-know basis, and often there's a lot of lies. I was up here. I had no power in the Moonies. I was used as an American front person, but I got to sit in on meetings and hear that democracy was satanic. We need a theocracy to rule the world. We have to infiltrate Congress. We have to change the Constitution when we take power in America and kill people who violate our rules. I literally heard this with my own ears in 1974 from Sun Myung Moon. And that's what we're dealing with right now. These groups, and Moon is just one of many cults in the cult of Trump, that are authoritarian and trying to impose a fascist authoritarian state on us. This is a graphic from my book, The Cult of Trump. And I was trying to say that there are cults controlling Trump and MAGA, and cults that are bringing their members to say that God, called Trump to be president, etc. So it's not that people are just believing in Trump blindly. The large majority of people are in these cults called New Apostolic Reformation churches and mega churches, and what makes them not normal or healthy Christian churches is the leaders claim, they put their hand over their head and they say, I'm an apostle or I'm a prophet and I can speak directly to God. And God told me that Trump won 2020. And these people claim to speak in tongues and cast out demons and do faith healings, but they really control their members and brainwash their members to not doubt anything because it's evil demons or Satan trying to invade you. I'm about halfway through the slides and then we can open it up. So I did a doctoral dissertation on how to update the law regarding undue influence, if there are any lawyers listening. The dissertation is on my website, and it's also there. It's been translated into Spanish. And I included law professor Alan Shefflin's social influence model in my dissertation because it's a way to explain to judges or juries who have the influencee and their receptivity or vulnerability. We have the influencer, their identity, their status, the predator, the predatory organization, and what's their purpose, what are their techniques, what's the context that it's happening, and what are the consequences. And the consequences when there is undue influence is family and friends say there was a radicalization. This person is not the same person that I know and love. They're using a different language system. They don't make sense. They're all of a sudden lying or repeating lies. So there really are telltale direct points. On this slide, I have what authoritarians comprise the cult of Trump on the top of chapter 7. And by the way, if you haven't read The Cult of Trump yet, it's been re-released with a short forward by George Conway and an afterword by myself. And there's also an audio version if you prefer to listen. But in chapter 7, I talk about the puppet masters, and in chapter 8, I talk about the followers. And the top of chapter 7 was Putin and Russia. And I've learned a lot more since 2019 when I wrote the original book about Russian actual recruitment of Donald Trump in the 80s as an asset, according to Yuri Shvets, who was a KGB official who came to the United States after the Soviet Union fell. The Council for National Policy, this is a group I did not know about while I wrote The Cult of Trump. Ann Nelson wrote a great book called Shadow Network. And it turns out the Moonies were founding members of the Council for National Policy. This is a secretive, ultra-wealthy policy group. They actually put one of their people in as the founding editor of the Washington Times. So if you want to understand some of the players, the dark players. Check out Ann Nelson's book, Shadow Network. I've interviewed Ann, so you can watch, go on my Substack or go to my YouTube channel and watch the interviews. Jeffrey Charlotte wrote two Times best-selling books on a group called The Family. I should say, as a cult expert, there are hundreds of cults that call themselves The Family, but this one did the national prayer breakfasts. This one recruited Democrats and Republicans into this Christian-esque cult. And if you have Netflix, I recommend the series because it's a more updated version than the books. Opus Dei is a Catholic right-wing cult. I recently interviewed Gareth Gore, who has a fantastic book out on Opus Dei. Opus Dei, William Barr is Opus Dei. Leonard Leo, Opus Dei, Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation, and Project 2025, Opus Dei. So, and these are the folks who think the Pope is satanic. This is a group you should really understand. It behaves like a mind control cult. I already just mentioned the New Apostolic Reformation, groups with the prophets and the apostles. There are overlaps to dominionism, Seven Mountain Dominionism. Mark Burnett, who did The Apprentice, was setting Trump up to be this successful, well-known businessman, but he's the head of one of the seven mountains, the media mountains. And then I just recently interviewed Amanda Tyler, who's a Baptist, who has a book that came out yesterday called How to End Christian Nationalism. So if you're not familiar with my podcast, The Influence Continuum, this is an advertisement to come look at the video or listen to the podcast. We always do a blog with it. I'm almost done. The Jewish extreme right, I talked about Netanyahu in 2019. I'm Jewish, but I'm disgusted by the ultra-Orthodox extremists in Israel. I'm going to move on at the moment, but I'm happy to do questions and answers later. I mentioned the alt-right, the libertarians, the cult of Ayn Rand. The woman who said selfishness is good and altruism is evil. The woman who did the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. There are a lot of politicians and billionaires who are into Ayn Rand, and this ideology is so destructive. This kind of notion that greed is good, and the social Darwinism that, well, I have more money, therefore I'm a better person than you. I have more value than you. And then we have sovereign citizens who don't believe you should pay taxes, and they have no obligations to pay to help others in this country. And then the white power, the neo-Nazis, I added the NRA, which we now know was thoroughly infiltrated by Russia. Maria Butina, in particular, was a Russian agent who is now a parliamentarian. Okay, so I have two slides that I think are valuable. You can download the whole list for free on freedomofmind.com under Learn, Undo Influence. Look up malignant narcissism. So this was a term that Erich Fromm came up with to describe Adolf Hitler. And I've been using it ever since to describe the stereotypical cult leader profile, because they all manifest it, men or women. I should say they're mostly men running cults, but there are a few women like this. And I'll just go through them quickly. Grandiose, self-centered behavior, fantasies of power, success, and attractiveness. Excuse me, something popped. Need for praise and admiration, sense of entitlement, lack of empathy, very important. They can't put themselves in other people's shoes. They can't feel for someone else's distress or pain. They can guess and they can be slick about it, but they don't feel it. So therefore, for them, it's all about transactional. What's in it for me? How is this going to help me have more power or money or have more sex? But here's the psychopathological part that makes it the malignant part of narcissism. The person thinks they're above the law. Ends justify the means. Because I'm the greatest person on earth and I know more than the generals and more than the economists, I get to choose whatever, and it doesn't matter. Pathological lying, the interpersonally exploitative, sadistic, threatening, harassing, silencing any critics or ex-members. He's talking openly about revenge against his perceived enemies, violence, paranoia. So if you study these 13 characteristics, you will be able to protect yourself and your loved ones from, I'd say, 80% of every predator or cult that's out there. The next slide is probably one of the most important slides that I wish that was on the wall of every bathroom in America and on the wall of every therapist and every doctor, and it's a very simple graphic, but I tried to say influence is everywhere, but there's ethical, healthy influence, and there's unethical, unhealthy influences, and it's a continuum. It's not a binary. And so the characteristics on the healthy side is respect for your unique self, love-based, conscience-oriented, respect for creativity and humor, free will and critical thinking. On the other side is what I had a slide about, the disruption of identity, the dissociative disorder. Like me as a Mooney was not me, Steve Hassan. It was Steve Mooney, and so this false identity gets created. And I have a model that I call the BITE model of mind control. I'll just go ahead for a second and come back. It stands for controlling behavior, controlling information, controlling thoughts, controlling emotions. If you can control these 4 components, you can control a person's identity and make it dependent and obedient on the cult. And when I'm using this, and this is BITE model has many criteria, so you can download this for free as well. But what I say is the more BITE, the more unhealthy and destructive it is to the right. Healthy leaders know their limits, empower people, they're trustworthy and accountable. The bad leaders is what I was saying, malignant narcissists. They're elitist, they're grandiose, they're power hungry. They want complete control over people. And healthy organizations to the unhealthy organizations. So when people think about influence, I want to encourage people to not think that it's just slippery slope or who can say one person's religion is another person's cult. No, healthy religions give informed consent. You can read critical information. You can ask to see the accounting records. You can leave without fear or harassment. On the other side, it's very different, and there's no legitimate reason to ever leave a destructive cult. And that phobia indoctrination is one of the universals. That if you leave, you'll be miserable, you'll kill yourself, you'll be hit by a car, or the leader has magical powers. So I'm almost finished. But I invite you to come to Freedom of Mind, download this for free, download the whole list of this, study it, share it with your family and friends. I wanted to put in a slide about a blog I did on these three documentaries, which if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend them. Social Dilemma, People You May Know, and The Great Hack. These three docs, they're dated at this point to a certain extent, but a lot of people need to understand that our personal data is being collected, and if it's not being collected with our permission, we're getting hacked from our banks, from our cell phone companies, from our Experian and other credit monitoring systems. And what we're living in right now, in my opinion, is World War III, except it's largely psychological warfare, or PSYOPs, psychological operations. And what's happening with AI systems are people don't understand how they're being influenced covertly over time, and people are on their phones 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and their minds are getting radicalized to become more extreme on the left, more extreme on the right, or just wanting to kill themselves or opt out of society, give up on politics, don't vote at all. So there's real warfare that's being that we're being exposed to. I decided to keep this slide in, even though it's been taken down from YouTube as hate speech. I can assure you, it had absolutely nothing to do with hate. It was all about how QAnon was a psyop. And it did mention Michael Flynn being at the very beginning of the Q psyop. And we know this through forensic data mining of Twitter back to the first tweet about QAnon, and hashtags of where we go one, where we go all. This is a slide of a TEDx talk I did, talking about a 4-step reality testing strategy people can do for themselves using the influence continuum, the BITE model, Robert Lifton's model of Chinese Communist mind control. And that's on my website for free as well. My dissertation is up. This is a really hard to read slide, but I've been talking about what to do to help someone who's been radicalized by MAGA, and what not to do and what to do. And a lot of people have not taken me literally or seriously, but I'm very serious about this because I was in the Moonies and I understand what works and what doesn't work to help people to step back and reality test. What doesn't work is trying to argue rationally with facts. What doesn't work is trying to attack the leader, the doctrine, or the policy of any cult. It's about reconnecting, if you know this person, if they're a family member, a coworker, being warm, respectful, saying, I care about you, you're intelligent, and asking genuine, respectful questions and waiting for them to think about it, giving you an answer, and then following up with another question and another question. Because how do you deprogram someone? You don't. You can empower people to get in touch with their own minds and their own experiences and their own doubts, and give them frameworks for how to reality test. For me, my deprogramming, learning about Chinese communist mind control was the crucial missing link, because I didn't feel I was brainwashed. I believed I was following God. I'll be with you in 1 second, Lance. I'm almost finished. But the key thing is that it's a process getting somebody into a mind control cult, and it's a process of helping them to exit. But we have to destigmatize getting out. We have to make it okay for people to say, yeah, I was in Scientology, I was in the Moonies, I was in a church that had an apostle, and I realized that it's wrong, and I left. And I want people to say, good for you. Congratulations. Tell me about it. Welcome back to society. Welcome back to the world. This is a slide of an online course that I've created, aimed initially for mental health professionals, because mental health professionals have zero training in graduate school or post-grad on how to even identify someone who's been brainwashed or raised in an authoritarian cult. And yes, Mormonism is an authoritarian cult, and the Jehovah's Witnesses are too, and people are clueless. These are the 3 books of mine that are in publication to this date with audios. This is the first book I recommend reading if you're really serious about wanting to understand this crazy world that I am an expert in. This is the book for how to help loved ones to get out. And this is the book on the cult of Trump. And for those of you with cell phones, this is my little QR code. If you want to snap it, you can find links to all my goodies. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and
All
and I
right.
can start taking questions. Now, do we want people to write chats, or do people just speak? What should we do?
We're raising hands. That's why Lance raised his hand, and
Okay.
I asked that people raise their hand using
Okay,
the computer.
great. So, Lance, go for it. You have to unmute first, though.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. It's great to see you. It's great to finally meet you. Big fan. Follow you everywhere on all of the various media. Big fan of your work. I appreciate it. Behind me, you see my city of Albany, New York, which was the nexus, as it were, of the Nexium cult.
I was going to say, Keith Raniere, right? He's in jail for 120 years.
Exactly. So here, in Albany, and also up the road in Saratoga Springs. Keith was one guy, right? And one of the things that you touched upon in your presentation, which was fantastic, we greatly appreciate it. It was very well put together, and I think helped give people a good overview of things. One of the things that you touched upon in your presentation, of course, is I want to choose my words carefully. You referred to one of the many cults and the complexity and overlapping. I mean, that's one of the things that I think is difficult for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. It seems to many of us, I think, that there are multiple cults that we're dealing with when it comes to the MAGA world, and many of them are involving some of the same members. They overlap, they intertwine. Can you talk about that a little bit more and give us an example? And finally, I just want to say I'm glad you brought up Mike Flynn, who, and I'm a former military. I recognize some of his techniques straight out of the psychological warfare playbook. Jim Stewartson has done a great job explaining a lot of this. But
Jim was in that dismantling QAnon TEDx, and it was Jim who explained alternate reality gaming to me, which I don't do video gaming, and I didn't know about that technology. He said, yeah, Q is using my tech my stuff from Pokemon Go, etc. So anyway, yeah, but Jim Stewartson is in a lawsuit, or he's being sued by Michael Flynn for saying that he's Q, and but we have evidence that he's definitely a bad actor. Russia. Anyway, so let me say that I've learned a ton since the book was written in 2019. I did do an afterward, but I've learned if I wrote the book again, or if Simon and Schuster allowed me to, they didn't. I would have added Falun Gong, the Chinese cult that does Epoch Times and is a huge disinformation propagandist cult. I would be adding Scientology. I would have been talking more about the Moonies explicitly, and so, but the big actor is Russia, and Russia has convinced a lot of right-wing Christian nationalists that he's with them. And that Moscow or St. Petersburg is the third Rome. And there's been and Putin uses the Russian Orthodox Church as a vehicle to control the minds of the Russian people. This is not about freedom of religion. Lance, help me out. What else did you want me to speak about?
I just wanted you to perhaps expand a little bit upon the interplay or overlapping nature of the various cults. I mean, it seems like you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned Russia. Russia seems to be among the most powerful common denominators here that links them all together. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I wanna tell people to watch my two-parter with Craig Unger and Yuri Shvets on Craig's book American Compromat, which is about Russian influence. That's a very a key resource. But in addition to Jim Stewartson, I want to turn people on to my colleague Dave Troy, who and Dave does TEDx Mid-Atlantic. He's the one who sponsored the Dismantling QAnon TEDx.
He also just did a great conversation with Unger.
Exactly, and Gore, who on Opus Dei, like he and I, like which book have you read? And, which one should I read next? And from the beginning, and Dave sought me out initially years ago, and we are on a Signal thread where we're constantly talking to each other and sharing resources and stuff. And Dave said, "What do you think of crypto, Steve?" I'm like, "It sounds like a multi-level marketing cult. We call these commercial cults. It's like there's no substance. It's just an idea, and you get people to pay in, and the people at the top do great, and everyone else loses." And I've been working with multi-level marketing groups for a really long time, I think. And there was a recent podcast Dave did on crypto, which is excellent. So I'm trained in complex systems thinking. I was lucky to have a brother-in-law who was an MIT-trained physicist who created the New England Complex Systems Institute in the 80s. So I was trained in thinking not linearly, but microscopic to the macroscopic, and increasing feedback loops and decreasing feedback loops, and thinking in terms of networks of relationships. And Dave is an expert at networking models. And so you can see overlaps of groups where they're amplifying each other's messages on certain topics, because one may be Christian, one may be Jewish. They both want Trump for different reasons. But we know for sure the fossil fuel people in corporations. Coke is the second largest private corporation in the U.S. Very bad actor. Did an interview with Christopher Leonard on his excellent book Cokeland, if you want to understand about that corporate cult. And it's run like a cult, a corporate cult. And Enron was a corporate cult, and Theranos was a corporate cult, and FTX is a corporate cult. So don't think cults are just religious. Anyway, there's a bunch of hands up, so let me move on, because I'm gonna have a hard stop at 9. Because
they're appearing left to right on my screen.
Yes, Charles is next.
Charles. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I have a question. I grew up in San Francisco. I was a kid when Jim Jones and the People's Temple happened, which was absolutely horrific. And wondered if you've done any kind of comparative studies between Jim Jones or the Branch Davidians and kind of the MAGA kind of cult.
So funny you should say that. Chapter 3 of The Cult of Trump is on the stereotypical profile of cult leaders, and I compared Trump with Jim Jones, Moon, my former cult leader, and Hubbard of Scientology.
Okay.
And I really want to invite people to read the book. A lot of people are like, I don't need to read the book because I know it's a cult. And I'm like, we've got years ahead of us that no matter what happens in the election, we need to understand the bad actors, the methodology. We need
their thought processes towards
exactly
how they ended up there.
Yep, exactly.
But I also do remember, God, I think it was last year, maybe a year before, there was some family in Pennsylvania, and they went out, they put the dogs inside, they went out in the backyard, and they shot themselves and I think it was sort of the excuse that I got was sort of, well, it was because Trump lost the 2020 election and they couldn't deal with it.
I'm not sure about that particular story, but if people would like to, be interested in following my work, I have social media, I have a team, I have a Substack, and I try to comment as news stories are breaking from my angle on things. So check it out. Marty, you're up next.
Thank you.
Marty.
I'm unmuting. I actually have a whole lot of questions, but I'm going to limit it to 2 because
great. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. First is, I noticed that the description has some similarities to DID, and I'm wondering,
dissociative identity disorder for those who don't know mental health lingo.
So, and
it's not DID.
I know it's not the same, but is it related? Could it be considered a medical disorder?
I consider it for sure a medical disorder, but unlike the other things in the diagnostic manual, 300.15 describes it, but it's missing you need 5 of the 7 following symptoms to diagnose it. So the whole book, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, it's really voted on by committees, and so needless to say, brainwashing is still considered to be controversial, and a lot of people don't understand social psychology. They don't understand hypnosis. I'm an expert in hypnosis. I've studied it since the 80s, and I did 2 chapters recently in an academic textbook on the dark side of hypnosis. DID is created in childhood from multiple abuse situations where there's a mixture of love and attention, but then brutalization and rape and other horrible things, so that there's a fragmenting of self. What this is and I had a very distinct identity by age 19, very clear. I was an extra honor student, but when I went through this indoctrination, I literally had a different identity. I was told this was Satan, this is God, you're being reborn, Moon is your true father, Hak Jahan is your true mother, and I was literally hypnotically and through BITE program. When I had my break, when I had my moment where I doubted, I had a snapping experience where I was like, what the hell happened to me? I had all these memories of abusive stuff that I couldn't process through this identity, but this got free, and then was the work to try to figure things out and integrate myself in a healthy way. Cheryl, you are up. I hope I pronounced your name properly.
I just want to break in for 1 second just to make you aware it's 8:45.
Yeah, 15 minutes.
Yes, I know. We're hard set for that.
Yeah,
so,
thanks.
Cheryl, go ahead.
Yes, you did pronounce my name correctly. Very quickly, the slide on how to get members out of the cult of Trump, is that available on your website for download?
Yes. If it's not on the website, it should be. It'll be in my Substack. My Substack is free, at least through the election. I really don't like paywalls, but I'm also I've been funding myself through my individual client hours, and I can't keep it up. So, I mean, people are starting to contribute, and if I can get enough subscribers, I can keep doing stuff and hire people part-time to help me with social media. So, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And chapter 9 of The Cult of Trump is on how to help people who are in MAGA. Amy, you're up.
I had a question that's related. And I asked, I think, in the chat as well, around the anger that's out there in the world. And one of the things I struggle with as a mother, and what I'm seeing is there's just bad behavior. And not going to get angry, but I mean, this don't tell. I find myself saying more and more that that's not okay. Like I'm going to speak up
don't
now.
Tell? What is
so
that?
When you like how to help free someone from the cult of Trump, like don't tell them, your goal is to help them make their own discoveries. But I find myself in situations with family members, especially, where they'll say something to me and I find myself saying, no, that's actually not okay. Not okay.
So let me interrupt you, Amy,
Please.
Because when you're in a mind control cult, you typically want to recruit everyone else, and you want to use the techniques used on you on everybody else, and it feels very offensive and intrusive and traumatic, actually. So when it's a family member or a friend and they say something that's ridiculous, it's very hard to moderate your own triggers, your own emotional reactions. But I urge people to learn. If you understand intellectually they have a dissociative disorder, and that if you meet them in anger and escalate the volume, etc., it's not going to help them get out, and it's going to make you feel miserable. So it's really about understanding how to make strategic decisions based on what's going to help, even a little bit. And so and this is another thing I want to do, which is train people and do role plays and demonstrate how Steve reacts when people say ridiculous things like, of course there's no climate warming.
It's even
Right?
more. It's more hurtful than that, though. Like I've often, if we get to transgender, and I have children, so family members will come in and they'll say things, and it's, I kind of have to stop them. Like, sorry, we don't say that.
When
like we
they're
don't
children, you have an obligation as a parent to protect them. So that's a different thing entirely. You get to set rules and just say, listen, if you want to talk adult to adult, we be in another room or we do it outside of the house. When you're here, if you would like to be a guest at my house, these are the rules and you have to enforce them. So I'm 1,000% for protecting children from things. And I want to state something categorically. Humans operate thinking we're rational. Humans are not rational. We're emotional. We are rationalizing. And humans like to think that we're individuals, and we're not. We're biopsychosocial beings. We're group people. Our species have survived because we have families and extended families and communities and faith communities. We like to be with others. It's not good to be alone, and that's part of the mind control when we had COVID and people were isolated and weren't hugging each other and only seeing each other on screens, right? But what I'm trying to convey is if we can cultivate a learning mindset, a curiosity about life, an optimistic future thing, we're going to be in a better place to deal with what the media knows, which is if it bleeds, it leads. The more upsetting, the more horrific, the more hate-filled, the more emotional arousal, the longer people will stay on things and they'll reshare things. Oh, before I forget, there's a wonderful new nonprofit called truemedia.org. truemedia.org. And they're 90% successful at identifying deep fakes. And before you, if you see a video or whatever, before you like it and share it, you can take the URL, put it in the URL of truemedia.org, and with 90% accuracy know if it's real or fake. And if it's fake, don't amplify it. And that's a rule of information warfare, is you don't take the lie and amplify it. Can you believe this guy lied? It's like, no, you tell the truth and you amplify, what the facts are on things. So Davis just popped in the upper left. You're up, Davis.
I just wanted to note two things. The first, I didn't hear you talk about the Nazi Party as a cult.
The Nazis, yes, I had one little thing about Nazis or neo-Nazis on one of the slides. But if you're not familiar with Prequel, I interviewed a Jesuit historian who wrote a book, Nazis in Copley Square. The Nazis were keeping the U.S. out of World War II intentionally, and they tried to do a physical coup in 1940. And the Nazis never left the U.S.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Davis.
Yeah, I really wanted to focus on the end of the Nazis because
the Nazis are not ended.
I understand in some sense. In Nazi Germany, they lost in 1945, and 10% of the population committed suicide. And that's something
I haven't heard the 10% number, but
about
whatever.
that number. Yeah.
Anyway,
some whole towns followed Hitler's example. The second thing,
haven't heard that in all of my years. So
It's
please email me the facts on that one, because that
Okay.
sounds like I should have learned that if that's true.
yeah,
Anyway, what's your question, sir?
The second question really came down to, you've been looking at this for a while, and I wondered how you'd positioned two theoretical constructs that came out of what the Nazis did in World War II. Cognitive dissonance and distraction. Because they're both
Cognitive dissonance theory was created by Leon Festinger in 1957 in his book When Prophecies Fail. It's actually the model that I based the BITE model from, because he talked about thoughts, feelings, and behavior, and it's the essence of cognitive behavioral therapy, is understanding people like to have consistency between their beliefs, their feelings, and their behaviors. And if you can get people to do extreme behaviors, they tend to rationalize it in order to feel good about it. They don't go, Oh,
That's actually-
I shouldn't have sold my house and gone up to the mountain for the UFO. They say, "Oh, the leader said we saved the earth by our faithfulness." So I feel good that I sold my house and went up and no flying saucer showed up. So cognitive dissonance, I really want people to learn basics of social psychology. He was a social psychologist. What was the other concept you raised, Davis?
Another one that came from Fessinger is called distraction. And in my experience, distraction is a very important thing that they did in a number of cults that I'm aware of. But one of them is the Moonies. If you had a question, they tried to move you onto something else.
So I'm not aware of Festinger talking about distraction, but I wrote about distraction. So what you need to understand is attention. The mind has a limited bandwidth of attention. I think the number is 5 to 7 bits of information at any given moment. We're getting unconscious information by the millions, but if you can misdirect people's attention, it's the art of magicians and mentalists. They distract you from what they're actually doing to get your attention elsewhere. And in the cult of Trump, I talk about many of the mind control techniques that I see Trump using, and one of them is projection. You know, he does a coup, he blames the other on a coup, and he's doing a lot of what's called NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which is based on the work of Milton Erickson, the psychiatrist, who, interestingly, the CIA consulted with for MK Ultra. But that's another topic for a different day. We got 3 minutes left.
And
Glenn, you get the last comments, I think.
I'm gonna thank you very much for your time. This group has been in existence 8 years, almost to the day. After election day, it'll be 8 years. We've, somebody recommended you back in June, and then I won't name who it is, brought you again to the forefront. And I do appreciate your time. And I know that everyone in the group really appreciates your time.
Yeah, thank you. And thank all of you. And I'm making an appeal. I'm saying this isn't over November 5th or even January 7th. We need to declare a public health emergency. We need to do inoculation programs, and I recommend my mentor who just passed away, Phil Zimbardo's Heroic Imagination Project, which has little video clips that explains important social psychology teachings. That should be in every school, in every church, in every synagogue, teaching everybody about this. And disclosure, there's a segment on cults that I'm in on that one. We need to have training programs for clinicians, which is why I created a CE course online. But we need to teach everyone who's going into mental health to identify people who are grown up in mind control cults, to know how to interact with them in an effective therapeutic way, etc. And we need to destigmatize the fact that intelligent, educated people can be lied to, their brains can be hacked, and there's life after cult. Instead of calling people morons or jerks or idiots, I have 2 masters and a PhD, and I was a right-wing fascist, and I could have been in a lot longer, I'm telling you, if my family didn't seize the moment and love me and rescue me. And people can be in cults for decades, and they still will want to leave if the door opens, and they feel like there's safety out there and people care about them. Love is stronger than mind control. So that's my last thing. And then I say it's freedom of mind. It's your mind, and only you should control it.
Right.
have an internal locus of control for your decisions.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We're going to stay on talking for 15
Talk about me all you want. No, just kidding.
Yes, we
Thank
will.
you for the opportunity, and be well, everybody.
All right.
Thank
Take
you
care.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.